Yeah, so there's a Pennsylvania-based group called the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, or CELDEF. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, but it's less of a mouthful, so I'll go with that. And for the last 8 years, they've been trying to get a fracking ban in Youngstown. And last year, they couldn't even get their proposed ban on the ballot because it turns out that that would actually conflict with the state constitution. So they decided, all right, we're going to amend the state constitution. And basically, very similar to the way that Colorado's attempting to, where locally you could have more restrictions on development, and those would take precedence over state laws and regulations that, in that case, would allow for development. And one of the things that has become very clear looking at this issue is that you have this group, and most of whom are outside of the state, let alone the city, who are like just constantly going through the process of getting these proposed bans on, and like their downside is very small, but the industry and then anybody who values energy in the area has to spend a lot of money to fight these off. And even though they keep winning every single time, and I think there's just this pervasive sense there, but more broadly, that there's a real feeling by people who are pro energy that there's this overwhelming opposition, and it just takes so much time and expense and feels like it's coming at you from every different angle, and just feel like, well, how can we actually respond to all of these pinpricks that, add up to ultimately a knockout blow when you get something major passed, potentially could be happening in Illinois or Denver right now, or in Colorado right now.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this. So it's to bring it back to an earlier discussion. These are policies that would make Ohio certainly a much worse place to live. And the specific place, or one of the specific places, called the Mahoning Valley. I don't know if it's Mahoning or the Mahoning Valley, but I mean, this is a case where you've got a technology that is very valuable, that allows an area to create a lot of value, that gives more job opportunities to people to create that value, that generally drives down energy prices, that makes it easier to get access to affordable natural gas. And then that makes everything else in the society possible, because energy is the industry that powers every other industry. And in general, the safety concerns with this kind of industrial operation are much less than with others. So what can the industry do? Well, I'm going to talk about this in my talk on Thursday in particular. So part of what they need to do is really I think what they need to do most importantly is frame the issue properly. And I do like the framing of is, when we're looking for policies that'll make Ohio a better place to live, and we want to avoid policies that'll make it a worse place to live. And therefore we have to look at the pros and cons of every policy. And then you have to talk about, well, here's the positive of being allowed to engage in this behavior. And also talk about people's property rights in terms of their right to engage in this behavior, and why it's wrong to prevent people from using their own property to benefit their lives and to benefit others' lives. So you need to have that part of it. You need to have a good account of the risks and side effects, and to really try to identify those a lot more precisely and make clear that they're being completely exaggerated. Another thing that's important to do is to say, so you want Ohioans to flourish. You want Ohio to be the best possible place to live. That's important in terms of framing the goal. Another thing that's really important is having a positive policy. So to say, okay, we are in favor of this policy of protecting people's rights. And part of what I think would be really valuable to do is to make clear to people, hey, here's what policy we advocate, and here's how it applies if a company in our industry does something wrong. So if you notice a danger, then you can ask for an injunction, or if something goes wrong, you can get restitution. Just making clear that what policies you're in favor of and how those really do protect people's rights. Because often there's this false alternative where either you're in favor of this very tyrannical policy that the advocates are advocating, or you're just for no law whatsoever and no protection. The idea is, no, we're for protecting everybody's rights. And so that includes, if something goes wrong, here's what we do, but we don't treat people as criminals when they're not doing anything wrong and when they're doing something right. So that's another, so it's, I like think of as you frame the goal or the standard, and I call it arguing to 100. You define that, and then you define what your positive policy is, and then make clear what your negative, what the negatives are, how making Ohio a worse place to live is what you want to avoid, and how you have to think about how to, I mean, one way to characterize the negative policies and the negative, I would call them the negative people. One piece of terminology I like is describing them as blockers. I like the alternative of builders versus blockers. And do we want to be a state of builders versus blockers? And just making clear that there are certain people who just want to block anything, and they'll just pick on all kinds of different things, but they have nothing positive to contribute, and yet they're trying to deprive you of opportunities to improve your lives. And I think with that kind of framing, where you stand for a positive goal, where you stand for a positive policy, where you oppose the opposition as moving us toward the opposite goal by advocating an opposite policy, that's part of what I call arguing to 100, and then arguing your opponents to negative 100.